Hello everyone. Welcome back to Midnight Murmurs. Tonight we step into the quiet heart of America. Places where neighbors wave, where streets are empty after dusk, where life seems safe. But in these forgotten corners a darker truth has always lingered. Beneath the silence of small towns lie stories that were never meant to reach the outside world. Stories buried in police reports, whispered through generations and locked away in dusty archives. These are the true small-town horror stories that prove even the most ordinary places can be haunted by something unspeakable. From isolated farming villages in the Midwest to coastal towns that vanish from maps. From southern crossroads soaked in superstition to northern hamlets scarred by secrets, the darkness spreads wider than most imagine. But one account tonight suggests a cover-up so disturbing, it forced an entire community into silence. What could be so terrifying that an entire town would erase its own history? Wherever you are, watching alone in your room, or from a quiet town far away from city lights, remember this warning. If you are new here, subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for daily true horror content they never wanted you to uncover. And tell me in the comments, would you dare step into a place like this? They told me not to go near the grain silos after midnight. Some things in that place aren't meant to be seen. Old Man Harris had warned me when I asked about the empty towers looming at the edge of town. I laughed it off then, thinking he was just another small-town eccentric with too much time and too many stories. But now, as the moon hangs low over the cracked asphalt, and the wind whistles through abandoned fields, I can feel that warning crawling under my skin like ice. The town behind me is quiet. Every street lamp flickering like it's holding its breath. The hum of my truck fades as I park at the edge of the lot, staring up at the dark silhouettes of the silos. They're massive, towering like metal ghosts, casting long shadows that twist across the dirt and rusted equipment. Every instinct in my body screams to turn back, but something keeps me rooted. A mix of curiosity and dread, the kind that makes you wonder whether it's fear or fascination pulling you forward. I take a tentative step toward them, my boots crunching over gravel and the wind shifts carrying a faint, metallic groan from deep within the structures. I stop, my heart hammers. I was warned, and yet, I keep moving. The closer I got to the silos, the more their presence swallowed the night. They weren't just old storage towers. They were monoliths of forgotten labor. Rust streaked down their sides like the veins of something alive. Everyone in town had stories, whispered warnings over coffee and in bar corners. Stories I'd always dismissed as small-town superstition. Missing kids from decades ago, strange lights that moved too fast for human eyes, shadows that didn't belong to anyone. But standing here staring up at the dark metal giants, I started to wonder if those stories were the kind of lies meant to keep you alive. I remembered Old Man Harris's words. They watch. They know. At the time I'd chuckled. Now I felt watched. Every creak of metal, every gust of wind that rattled the silo doors felt intentional, like the night itself was aware of me. My flashlight cut a narrow swath through the darkness, illuminating nothing but gravel and the empty husks of abandoned farm machinery. I crouched down near a rusted wheelbarrow, noticing strange markings etched into its side, scratches too deep and too deliberate to be random. Something had been here recently. My stomach knotted as I traced them with my finger, imagining what had made them. Then came a sound that froze me, a soft, dragging shuffle from the far side of the silos. I held my breath, listening. The wind had died, but the sound persisted, a slow, deliberate scrape that moved closer, circling, as if whatever it was knew I was watching. I wanted to call out, wanted to tell whatever it was to leave me alone, but my voice caught in my throat. Fear isn't loud. It's a tight knot in your chest that makes your hands tremble and your thoughts scatter. And yet beneath that fear, a stubborn, foolish curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to see for myself what the town had feared for generations. I stood, shining the flashlight toward the noise, heart hammering, and felt the first true chill of the night press against me. The silos were no longer just towers. They were guardians of something older, something patient, something that had been waiting. I forced my legs to move, stepping cautiously toward the far side of the silos where the dragging sound had come from. Every footfall on the gravel felt deafening, echoing through the night as if the silos themselves were listening. The flashlight beam jittered in my hands, illuminating broken crates, scattered grain sacks, and the skeletal frames of old farming equipment. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes that made my stomach tighten with unease. The wind had picked up again, carrying a faint, metallic scent that made my throat burn. I kept thinking about the stories, the missing kids, the flickering lights, the whispers that would carry across the fields when the town slept. It all felt too real now, like the air itself was charged with warning. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement near one of the smaller storage units, like a shadow darting just beyond the edge of the flashlight. I froze. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a stray animal. But instinct screamed otherwise. The dragging had stopped, replaced by a soft, almost deliberate tapping. Wood against metal. Something was moving in rhythm, testing the night, testing me. I could feel its gaze, heavy and unyielding, and my pulse quickened. I wanted to run, but every time I turned, the darkness seemed to shift. Closing off the paths I thought I knew, I kept moving, circling the silo, and found footprints in the dust, bare, small, and impossibly fresh. They led toward a rusted service door that hung half open, creaking softly as if inviting me in. My chest tightened, sweat prickling along my spine. The town's warnings echoed louder than my own thoughts. Never go past the silos after midnight. And yet some part of me, the part that had come all this way, the part that refused to turn back, pushed forward. I reached for the door handle, and the metal was icy under my fingers. My reflection in the corroded surface was pale and tense, eyes wide with fear and adrenaline. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, leaving the moonlit lot behind. The darkness swallowed me whole. The air inside was thick, musty, and alive with a faint whispering, as if the silos themselves were exhaling secrets. I had crossed the threshold, and there was no turning back. The interior of the silo was nothing like I expected. The walls rose impossibly high, smooth and metallic, reflecting the thin beam of my flashlight in dizzying patterns. Shadows stretched like living things, twisting with every small movement. The air was heavy and smelled of rust and old grain, but beneath that was something else, an acrid, almost iron-like tang that made my stomach churn. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart, and forced myself to move deeper. I noticed the footprints again, now more numerous, some larger, some smaller, crisscrossing in ways that made no sense. Whoever or whatever had been here had no concern for order. My flashlight caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A small, tattered doll lying on the floor, its face scratched and eyes dark with grime. I knelt to pick it up, and the echo of metal scraping against concrete made me jerk upright. The sound was coming from above, somewhere deep in the silo's shadowed rafters. I strained my ears, catching the faintest whisper, a voice, soft and deliberate, repeating my name. My pulse spiked. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. Silence answered, but the scratching returned, closer now, circling, teasing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with movement, as if the silo had a heartbeat of its own. I rounded a corner and found the source, a narrow stairwell spiraling upward into darkness. My curiosity overrode fear. Foolishly, I thought I could confront whatever waited. Step by step, the metal stairs groaned under my weight, each sound magnified in the stillness. Shadows clung to the edges, darting and stretching like living fingers. At the top, I saw it. A figure crouched in the corner, too tall and thin to be human, its face hidden, watching. I froze. Its eyes, or what I imagined to be eyes, gleamed with intent, unblinking. I felt a cold, suffocating presence pressing down, heavy with malice. My instincts screamed, my mind raced, but my body was locked in place. I realized then that I had underestimated the warnings, underestimated the silos, underestimated the quiet, patient terror that had been waiting for someone foolish enough to walk past midnight. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and the figure moved, just slightly, but enough to make the shadows bend and twist in impossible directions. I was trapped in its gaze in the heavy, suffocating dark, and for the first time I understood that curiosity here was a dangerous thing. Panic surged and I turned to run, but the stairs seemed to stretch longer than before, each step echoing like a drumbeat of my impending doom. The metal beneath my boots groaned and shadows flared along the walls, reaching for me like grasping hands. I could hear it moving behind me, slow, deliberate, the dragging of something too heavy to be human. My breath came in ragged gasps and every instinct screamed that I was dangerously close to being trapped. I stumbled off the stairs, landing hard on the cold, dusty floor of the silo's main chamber. Pain shot through my leg, but I couldn't stop. My flashlight flickered, casting frantic beams across piles of grain sacks and rusted equipment, the shadows leaping and twisting with unnatural life. I could feel it circling, studying, waiting for me to make a mistake. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might give me away, yet I couldn't slow it down. Then I saw a door at the far end of the chamber, slightly ajar, a sliver of faint moonlight slicing through the darkness. Desperation fueled my sprint, my hands dragging against the floor, scraping over concrete and discarded tools. The air around me thickened as if the silo itself were resisting my escape. I reached the door and shoved it open, but the shadows surged, dark, amorphous shapes that lunged toward me, whispering my name with a soft, mocking cadence. I tumbled out into the night, gasping and shaking, the cold wind slapping my face like reality itself had slapped me awake. I ran blindly across the gravel lot, heart hammering until the towering silhouettes of the silos seemed to recede. But the sense of being watched didn't fade. Behind me, a faint dragging sound persisted, softer now but steady, patient. I glanced back once, and in the pale moonlight I swore I saw a figure perched atop the tallest silo, impossibly thin and impossibly still, watching me. My legs gave out and I collapsed onto the cracked asphalt, lungs burning, adrenaline draining, every nerve raw with terror. Some part of me wanted to return to know what I'd glimpsed, but the primal part, the part that had been screaming since I stepped inside, took over. I promised myself I would never ever walk past the silos after midnight again. But even as I limped back toward town, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had watched me wasn't done yet. I finally reached the edge of town just as the first hints of dawn began to stain the sky. The streets were empty, silent, and unnervingly ordinary, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. My hands were still shaking, my legs weak, and my mind replayed every shadow, every scrape, every whisper from the silos. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those impossibly thin, watching figures trailing me, but the empty streets offered no comfort. Back home, I locked every door and window, yet sleep refused me. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind rattling the eaves made me flinch, convinced that the silos, or whatever lurked within them, had followed me, if only in spirit. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I had escaped, but deep down I knew better. Some things, once glimpsed, never let you go. And now every night I find myself waking before midnight, staring at the dark horizon where the silos stand like silent sentinels. I was warned and I ignored it. Some part of me will never stop wondering what waits for the next fool who wanders past after dark. And maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting for me too. I grew up in a town so small that everyone knew your name before you even moved in. People whispered stories about the old Miller place at the edge of town, but nobody went near it after dark. They said strange things happened there, things no one could explain. As a kid, I laughed along like everyone else, calling it ghost stories to scare tourists or keep kids from wandering. But as I got older, those stories never left me. There was something about the way the air changed when you neared the old house, a heaviness that made your stomach turn. It was a chilly autumn evening when it all began. I was driving home from a long shift at the diner, roads empty, headlights cutting through thick fog. That's when I first saw it, or at least thought I did. A figure crouched near the tree line, too still to be human, yet somehow moving with the shadows. My heart skipped, and for a moment I wondered if my small-town legend might hold more truth than anyone ever admitted. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just an animal, maybe a trick of the fog, but deep down I knew I'd crossed a line, and whatever I had glimpsed was only the beginning. After that night I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Every time I drove past the tree line near the Miller place, I felt a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. I started noticing other things too, small, almost insignificant details that suddenly felt off. Windows in abandoned houses stared blankly like hollow eyes. The air smelled faintly of smoke even when no one had lit a fire. And sometimes in the dead of night I heard faint whispers carried by the wind, though there was no one around. People in town noticed my change, of course, but their responses were vague, almost rehearsed. "Don't go poking around where you don't belong," old Mrs. Hensley would warn, shaking her head. I laughed it off, but the unease lingered, and I realized everyone had their own way of avoiding the Miller place story. That only made me more curious. It started with small, seemingly random encounters. I'd see movement in the shadows, a flash of something too fast to catch, or a silhouette just at the edge of the woods. Once, while walking past the old church lot, I felt eyes on me, a weight pressing down on my chest as though the fog itself were alive. My friends dismissed it. "It's just your imagination," they said. But my gut told me otherwise. Then came the night I found the first real clue. A crude carving on a tree at the edge of the forest. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that radiated an almost tangible menace. Beneath it, a shallow hole had been dug, long abandoned, but recent footprints led away into the woods. My curiosity won over fear, and I followed them, just a little, until the trees swallowed me in shadows. That's when I realized the legend wasn't just a story passed down by bored townsfolk. It was real, and it was waiting for someone reckless enough to notice. The next few days I couldn't stop thinking about that carving. I started digging into the town's history, visiting the library and flipping through dusty newspapers. The Miller family had vanished decades ago, leaving the house to rot. But every so often a story resurfaced. Strange noises, missing pets, even people who wandered too close and never returned. Locals spoke of a presence that fed on fear, but nobody would explain it outright. It was as if the town itself conspired to keep the secret alive. One evening I decided to explore the house. The front yard was overgrown, tangled with weeds taller than my knees, and the windows were shattered, dark eyes staring into nothing. I stepped inside and the smell hit me first. Damp wood, rot, and something sour I couldn't place. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I could swear the air thickened, pressing against me. I found a journal in the corner, yellowed and brittle, with pages filled with frantic handwriting. It spoke of shadows that moved on their own, voices calling in the night, and a warning. Do not follow what waits in the woods. It watches, it waits, it knows you. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know more. That night I returned to the tree line near the carving. The fog had rolled in heavier than before, curling around the trees like fingers. And then I saw it, a dark figure slipping silently between the trunks. I froze, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was another person or an animal, but the movement was wrong. Too deliberate, too precise. It vanished before I could react, leaving nothing but an oppressive silence that pressed into my ears. I began noticing signs everywhere, footprints in the mud, faint scratching noises on rooftops, and doors that I was certain I'd locked now hanging ajar. The town's legends weren't just stories. They were warnings. I was being drawn deeper, pulled by a force that felt alive and patient, and with every step, every clue I uncovered, the sense of danger grew. I realized I had crossed a threshold. Curiosity had become obsession, and whatever haunted this place was aware of me now. I shouldn't have gone back to the woods that night, but something in me refused to stop. The fog had thickened into a wall, muffling sound and warping shapes. Every tree looked alive, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. My flashlight cut narrow beams through the mist, revealing patches of disturbed ground, footprints leading deeper into the forest. My chest tightened with fear, but I pressed on, convinced that if I didn't confront whatever was there, I'd never be able to sleep again. And then I saw it. The figure. Taller than any human, hunched in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflecting something far older than the town itself. It moved silently, gliding between the trees with a grace that made my stomach twist. I froze, whispering my own name under my breath, hoping it hadn't noticed me. But I knew it had. A sudden sound shattered the stillness, the snapping of a branch behind me. I turned and caught a glimpse of movement, just a shadow slipping past. Panic surged. I ran, branches slashing at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. The fog seemed to swallow me whole, and I could feel its presence closing in, breathing down my neck. I stumbled into a clearing, gasping, and realized I'd reached the Miller house from the other side. The windows were dark, but faint whispers echoed from inside, chilling me to the bone. I tried to backtrack, but the forest had changed. Paths I thought I knew twisted into dead ends, as if the woods themselves were guiding me toward it. And then I understood. The legend was real. The stories, the warnings, the missing people, they all led here. The figure stepped into the clearing, fully visible now, and I couldn't look away. Its face was nothing like a human's, distorted, hollow, and impossibly elongated. It regarded me as if I were prey, studying every tremor of my fear. I wanted to run, to scream, to vanish, but my legs refused to obey. I realized in that terrifying instant that curiosity had led me here, and now I was part of the legend. Whatever had haunted the Miller place for decades wasn't done yet. It had been waiting for someone foolish enough to notice, and I had filled that role. The realization sank in with icy finality. The stories were true, and I was trapped in one of them. I barely remember how I got out of the forest that night. I ran blindly, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, my lungs burning with every ragged breath. Behind me I could hear it moving. Soft, deliberate steps, always just a little slower than mine, like it was toying with me. I dared not look back. Whatever it was patient and precise. By the time I stumbled onto the empty highway, my flashlight dead, the fog had lifted just enough for me to see the dim glow of my car in the distance. I climbed in, shaking uncontrollably, and locked the doors, my hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life, and I drove without thinking, not stopping until I reached the small diner at the edge of town, the one place that always felt safe. But even there, the feeling didn't leave me. I could swear I felt eyes on me, watching from the shadows outside. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Exhaustion, stress, maybe too many late-night shifts. But the signs were everywhere. Items in my home moved slightly. Doors I was certain I'd locked creaked open, and at night faint whispers drifted through my apartment. I wasn't imagining it. Whatever had haunted the Miller place had followed me. I began documenting everything. The carvings, the footprints, the strange encounters, trying to make sense of it. Friends asked why I seemed haunted, and I lied, saying I'd had a bad dream. But I knew better. The town's legends weren't just stories. They were warnings, and I had ignored them. Now I was living proof that the Miller house and its secrets were real. Every time I drive past the edge of town, my eyes drift to the tree line. The fog seems thicker there, almost alive, curling through the trees like smoke searching for prey. I know one day I might have to face it again. The thought chills me, but I can't look away. The legend that everyone laughed about, that no one admitted was true, it is. And it isn't finished with me yet. I've tried to live normally since that night, but normal no longer exists. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow cast by a flickering streetlight sends my mind spinning back to the Miller place. I've warned a few close friends, though most laugh and brush it off as exaggeration. They don't see what I see, don't feel what I feel. The constant weight of being watched. The subtle movements in the corner of your eye that vanish when you blink. Sometimes, when I drive past the tree line, I see it again. Just a fleeting glimpse, a shadow among shadows, and I know it remembers me. The figure waits, patient and eternal, a guardian of a story that refuses to die. The town continues its life, blissfully unaware, whispering legends over coffee at the diner or during late-night drives. Never knowing the truth, I've learned one thing. Small-town legends aren't just tales to scare children. They are warnings, carefully crafted and passed down through generations. And now I understand why. Because some things are real, some things wait, and some things never forget. The Miller place stands at the edge of town, silent and decaying, but I know the shadows within are alive. And I know deep down that my story isn't over. I never thought working nights at a gas station in a town this small would feel like stepping into another world. When the sun dips below the horizon, the streets empty faster than I can blink, leaving me alone with the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rumble of a passing car. The air smells different at night, like damp asphalt and something else I can't name, something wrong. My manager warned me about late-night stragglers, but I thought he was just exaggerating. He wasn't. On my very first shift, I noticed it immediately. The town feels watched. Shadows seem to linger longer than they should, and the silence stretches so thick it presses against my ears. Every time the door jingles, I jump, half expecting to see a familiar face and half hoping I don't. The pay is decent, and the nights are quiet in theory, but there's a tension here I can't shake, something that coils tight in the pit of my stomach whenever a car slows outside, only to drive past with no one in sight. I tell myself it's nothing, just small-town quirks. But deep down, I already know that this night, like every night to come, won't be simple. The first few nights blurred together, a monotony broken only by the occasional customer who made my skin crawl. Most people were normal enough. An old man buying a pack of smokes, a teenager grabbing an energy drink, but there were others. People who didn't look at me when they spoke, who whispered to themselves or tapped their fingers in patterns I couldn't decipher. Sometimes they'd linger near the windows, just staring, not at the store, not at the pumps, but through the walls as if they were watching something else entirely. I started noticing small things too. The register would be slightly off after a customer left, or a soda I swore I hadn't stocked would appear on a shelf in the wrong spot. At first I chalked it up to exhaustion or inattentiveness, but then came the sounds. Footsteps in the back room when no one was there. A soft scraping against the metal door of the storeroom, and once, a low, hollow whisper right behind me as I was stocking shelves. I spun around, heart hammering, and there was nothing. Just the humming fluorescent lights and the faint smell of gasoline. Some nights were worse than others. Rain would hammer the roof, making the store feel like it floated in a sea of darkness, and every shadow seemed to stretch into something alive. I learned to keep the door locked even during those slow nights, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. Sometimes I caught movement from the corner of my eye, someone standing outside, just beyond the reach of the streetlights, and when I blinked, no one was there. By the end of my first week, I was exhausted, but more than that, I was unsettled. There was a rhythm to the town I couldn't follow. A pattern in its quiet moments that didn't make sense. And I had the sinking feeling that the longer I stayed, the more I'd notice it. The empty streets that weren't empty, the faces that didn't belong, the eyes that never blinked. Something about this place wasn't right. I just didn't know yet how deeply wrong it was. It happened on a night that started like any other. The rain had stopped, leaving a slick shine on the asphalt, and the fluorescent lights buzzed softly above me. I was rearranging snacks when the door jingled, and I looked up to see a man standing there. He was tall, too thin, and something about the way he stood made my stomach twist. He didn't speak at first, just stood in the doorway, head tilted, watching me. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. "You don't belong here," he said. No one else was in the store, just me, him, and the hum of the lights. I forced a smile, trying to play it cool. "I'm the night clerk," I said. "This is my shift." He didn't respond. Instead, he just walked slowly past the pumps, staring at the shadows outside as if they were alive. I followed instinctively, trying to see what had caught his attention, but there was nothing. Only the black emptiness of the street and the dim glow of the gas lights. And then I saw it, a flicker, movement just beyond the edge of the lot. Something or someone ducked behind a tree and vanished. After that night, I started noticing patterns. Certain people only appeared after dark, their movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Some corners of the lot felt off limits, like stepping there would trigger something I couldn't imagine. And always the sense of being watched intensified. Sometimes I'd hear voices outside, low and indistinct, like a conversation happening behind walls I couldn't see through. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Sleep deprivation, isolation, overactive imagination. But then I caught glimpses, shapes moving too quickly, reflections in the windows that didn't match anyone inside, shadows stretching where no light fell. One night I saw a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, perfectly still, watching. I blinked and it was gone. Heart racing, I locked the doors, double-checked the cameras, and tried to convince myself I was safe. I wasn't. And with every passing night, I realized that the town itself was alive in a way I hadn't understood before, its darkness creeping closer, wrapping tighter, daring me to notice. The nights grew worse and the small town's shadows became impossible to ignore. One evening, as I was closing a late transaction, I noticed something outside, a movement too deliberate to be random. A figure lingered by the pumps, pale and still, like a statue waiting for something. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to speak. "Can I help you?" No answer. Only the faint sound of breathing, or maybe it was my own. I stepped outside, trying to catch a better look. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. When I got closer, it vanished. No footsteps, no sign of escape, just the empty lot staring back at me. My nerves were raw, but I couldn't ignore the reality. Someone or something was out there, watching, waiting. I locked the doors tighter than ever that night, checking every corner, every shadow. Then came the tampering. Shelves were knocked over, items displaced. The cash register opened without my hand touching it. Each night the disturbances became bolder. One night a local came in, claiming to check on things, but his eyes were too dark, too sharp. He didn't leave when I tried to send him out. Instead, he smiled in a way that didn't reach his face and muttered something I didn't catch. I felt trapped, as if every exit in that quiet town funneled me back to the gas station, back into the heart of the danger I couldn't escape. Sleep was impossible. I started staying alert even during breaks, scanning the windows, the pumps, the empty streets. Every shadow had potential. Every sound screamed threat. The line between reality and paranoia blurred. I wasn't sure anymore if the whispers I heard were real or if my mind was bending under the weight of constant fear. One night, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the back room, slow, deliberate, echoing against the concrete floor. Heart hammering, I grabbed a flashlight and swung it toward the sound. Nothing, just the flickering light and the oppressive quiet. But I knew someone or something had been there. It was too close. Too real. By then, I understood it wasn't just the town I had to fear. It was me being alone in it, and whatever watched from the darkness had been waiting for someone exactly like me. That night started like any other, but I could feel it before I even stepped into the store. The air was heavy, almost sticky, and the usual quiet felt wrong. As I unlocked the door, I noticed movement in the corner of the lot. Shapes flitting just beyond the glow of the streetlights, impossible to fully see. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself inside. Tonight, I told myself I would figure this out. Hours passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. The whispers outside grew clearer, more urgent, though still unintelligible. A shadow crossed the windows, slow and deliberate, and I froze, convinced it had been watching me all along. Then I saw the pattern. The figures, the whispers, the tampering, they weren't random. The town had rules, and I had unknowingly broken them by taking the night shift, by existing when I shouldn't have. I tried to leave once, just to step outside and catch a breath of normalcy. But the door wouldn't budge. It was like the town itself had locked me in. Panic surged, and I ran to the back, checking every camera, every corner, every possible exit. That's when I saw it. Etched into the concrete near the pump, a symbol I didn't recognize but which radiated cold, unnatural intent. And just beyond it, a figure crouched, staring directly at me. Eyes black as void. No blink, no expression. Only presence. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, fumbling for the phone to call for help. Nothing. No signal. The town had swallowed everything, leaving me alone with the unknown. And then the whispers became voices, murmuring warnings I couldn't understand but somehow felt like commands. I realized I wasn't just being watched, I was being studied, tested. The night had become a trap and I was the prey. Hours or maybe minutes passed. I don't know. Time lost meaning in that darkness. When the first hint of dawn touched the sky, the shapes vanished. The whispers died down and the town returned to its eerie quiet. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't relax. The gas station, the lot, the town itself had revealed a sliver of its true nature. I survived that night. But every night after, I knew it was only a matter of time before the darkness returned, and I wasn't sure if I would be ready. I quit shortly after that night, unable to bear the tension, the constant feeling of being watched, the whispers that seemed to follow me even outside the town. I told myself I'd never go back, that the gas station, the lot, the small town itself was a nightmare I had narrowly escaped. But the memory didn't fade. Even now, years later, I drive past that stretch of road and feel the weight of its darkness pressing through the car windows. Shadows in the corner of my vision, fleeting shapes just beyond the light, make my stomach twist with the same fear I felt those nights. Sometimes I swear I can hear faint murmurs carried by the wind, voices warning me to stay away, or maybe daring me to return. I've tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, the imagination of someone stuck in a quiet town too long. But deep down I know the truth. That place isn't just small. It's alive, it watches, and it waits. And for anyone who dares to take a night shift there, who thinks they can handle the quiet, it doesn't let you leave unmarked. Not really. I never thought much about our little town, Maplewood, population barely 3,000, until I started feeling it. Something crawling under my skin. A dull ache that no over-the-counter medicine could touch. At first I chalked it up to stress, to long nights at the plant, to too many cups of coffee and not enough sleep. But it didn't go away. It only got worse. Everyone said I should see Dr. Harlan. He'd been here longer than anyone could remember. A fixture of the town. The kind of doctor whose name carries weight even when no one really talks about him. His clinic was on Main Street, sandwiched between a shuttered diner and a hardware store that smelled like sawdust and oil. The windows were always fogged over, and the bell above the door jingled differently than you'd expect. Sharp, almost accusing. I hesitated before stepping inside that first time, but the pain pushed me forward. Something about the waiting room made my stomach twist. Too quiet, too clean, like the air itself was holding its breath. I should have turned around then. But I didn't. I wanted answers. And that's when Dr. Harlan looked up. His eyes too sharp, too knowing, and said, "I think I have exactly what you need." I remember walking out of the clinic that first day with Dr. Harlan's prescription in my hand, but not feeling any relief. The sun had dipped low behind the rows of maple trees, casting long shadows over the cracked sidewalks. Even the air felt heavier, like the town itself had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting. People passed by without greeting me, faces blank, eyes sliding over mine as if I wasn't there. It was the same people I'd nodded to 100 times before. Neighbors, co-workers. But now they seemed distant, like strangers wearing familiar masks. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just paranoia, my mind reacting to the pain. But when I got home and opened the small bottle of pills Dr. Harlan had given me, a chill ran down my spine. The liquid inside was darker than anything I'd ever seen prescribed, almost like diluted ink. The label had my name, my town, even my exact address scrawled in his looping handwriting, but no instructions beyond a vague, "take as needed." Trust me, I should have stopped there, should have thrown it away, but something in the way he'd looked at me, calm yet sharp, made it impossible. I swallowed the first dose, my throat burning as if the medicine was sliding down with a weight of its own. By nightfall, the ache in my body was replaced by something worse. My mind felt fogged, and shadows in my bedroom seemed thicker, darker, almost alive. I thought I heard whispers, voices just beneath comprehension, murmuring from corners I knew should be empty. Sleep didn't come. Not that night or the next, and then I noticed the town, or rather how it looked when I walked the streets in the dark. Windows shut tight, curtains drawn, lights flickering. People standing still on porches, staring at me or past me, I couldn't tell. The familiarity I'd always felt here dissolved into something strange, oppressive. It was then I realized Maplewood wasn't just small. It was contained, like a bubble I couldn't escape, and Dr. Harlan, he was at the center. The next day I went back to Dr. Harlan hoping for answers, or at least something that made sense. The clinic smelled the same, antiseptic and faintly metallic, like blood had been scrubbed clean but never fully gone. The bell over the door rang sharply when I entered, and the waiting room felt colder, almost unwelcoming. There were no other patients, just me and that uneasy silence pressing in from every corner. Dr. Harlan appeared from the back room like he'd been expecting me. His smile was calm, too practiced, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Back so soon?" he said, leaning against the counter with an air of casual authority. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I explained what had happened, the fog in my head, the shadows moving, the whispers, but he only nodded, jotting something in his ledger without looking up. "This is all part of the process," he said softly, like he was sharing a secret no one else could understand. "Some people react stronger than others, trust me. You'll see the results soon." I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to scream that something was wrong, that I felt like I was slipping into a place where I didn't belong. But the words stuck in my throat. I felt trapped, powerless. He handed me a new vial, smaller this time, its contents darker and thicker than the first. The instructions were even vaguer. Twice daily. No questions. The hesitation gnawed at me, but I couldn't bring myself to argue. I left the clinic with a growing sense of dread, each step heavier than the last. By evening, the effects were undeniable. My body convulsed with strange tremors I hadn't felt before. My reflection warped in the mirror, eyes wide and unfamiliar. I heard it then, the whispers louder, closer, sometimes behind the walls themselves. And when I looked outside, the town had changed again. Faces in windows peered at me with something more than curiosity. Suspicion, maybe even malice. Every familiar streetlight cast long, menacing shadows that seemed to twist toward me. I realized in a cold flash of panic that Dr. Harlan's medicine wasn't curing me. It was reshaping me. And worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to find out what or who I was becoming. The third day was worse. I woke with a pounding head and a sense that I wasn't alone in my own home. The whispers had multiplied overnight, seeping through the walls, echoing in my skull. I could almost make out words, but never fully, like they were teasing me, promising answers I couldn't reach. My hands trembled as I poured the medicine, each drop falling like a countdown. I tried to leave the house, to walk the streets and shake the unease, but Maplewood had shifted. Roads that should have led to the highway twisted into alleys I didn't recognize. Houses loomed closer than they should have, their windows dark, faces hidden. When I passed a neighbor, she froze mid-step, staring with an intensity that made my stomach knot. She didn't smile, didn't greet me, just stood there watching. By afternoon, I began to notice other patterns. People who had visited Dr. Harlan before me, or so I remembered, had gone missing, their houses empty, their cars gone. Every person I had known seemed altered. Blank stares, mechanical movements, strange obedience to something I couldn't name. The whispers felt connected to them somehow, like a current running under the surface of the town. I wanted to call someone, anyone outside Maplewood, but the phones were dead. Even my car wouldn't start, though I'd filled the tank the night before. Fear tightened around me like a noose, and I realized I had been foolish to trust Dr. Harlan, to think a doctor could cure me without consequence. That night, I took the medicine again, though my hands shook violently. Shadows crawled along the walls of my bedroom, and the whispering voices grew louder, closer, almost tangible. I saw fleeting figures in the corners of my vision. Other townspeople, or something else entirely, and I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I sat in the darkness, heart hammering, listening to the soft thrum of the town outside, the rhythm of lives I could no longer reach. I knew then that I was not merely sick. The medicine, the town, Dr. Harlan, they were all part of something bigger, something that I was trapped inside. I realized with a cold certainty that my life, my mind, maybe even my soul, were no longer my own. By the fourth day, desperation had replaced fear. I couldn't stay, but I also couldn't leave. Every exit I tried seemed blocked. Roads looping back, trees bending impossibly, the horizon folding in on itself. It was as if the town itself were alive, holding me in place. I packed a small bag, shoved the remaining vials of Dr. Harlan's medicine into it, and tried the car again. Dead. I decided to confront him. If he was the source of this nightmare, I needed answers, even if it killed me. I walked to the clinic, feeling every shadow twist and turn around me, watching, following. The streets were empty, or maybe they were filled with people standing still, frozen, waiting for me to make a mistake. Inside, Dr. Harlan was calm as always. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, like a man who had been expecting a visitor all along. "Ah," he said, his voice soft and smooth. "You've discovered the truth. What have you done to this town?" I demanded, voice shaking. "What are you doing to me?" He smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips. "I'm helping them," he said simply. "And you eventually. But it takes patience, trust, and compliance." I tried to run, but the door wouldn't budge. The walls themselves seemed to close in. The shadows on the floor stretched toward me, crawling, pulling, whispering promises of relief if only I surrendered. I felt the pull of the medicine in my veins, the voices in my head, the weight of the town pressing down. For a moment, I considered it. Compliance. It would end the ache, the paranoia, the whispers. But the thought of surrendering, becoming one of them, made my stomach churn. I turned to leave another way, only to find the hallway stretching impossibly, doors multiplying, mirrors reflecting not me, but something else entirely. Dr. Harlan's calm gaze followed me, unblinking. "You can fight it," he said, "but remember, you cannot fight the town. Not entirely." I realized then that escape was no longer a matter of opening doors or starting cars. Escape would mean outsmarting the town itself or surrendering to whatever it, and he, was shaping me into. And for the first time, I felt the true weight of fear, not for death but for the slow, creeping dissolution of who I was. I woke the next morning in my bedroom, the first rays of sun slipping through the blinds. For a fleeting moment I thought it was over, that the town, the whispers, Dr. Harlan's medicine, everything had been a nightmare. But then I saw the vial on my nightstand, dark and still, as if it had never been touched. My hands trembled as I reached for it, a part of me desperate to destroy it, another part trembling at the thought of what would happen if I didn't. The streets outside were quiet. Too quiet. Neighbors moved about their routines with a precision that felt unnatural. Smiles pasted on faces that didn't belong to the people I remembered. Maplewood looked the same, yet different, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for me to act. I packed my bag again, ready to leave, but I knew deep down I couldn't. Not really. Dr. Harlan's presence lingered everywhere. The clinic, the shadows, even in my own reflection. The town had claimed me in ways I couldn't fully understand, And I realized something horrifying. Some prescriptions don't cure. They transform. I took a step toward the door, heart hammering, whispering my own warning. Some towns are alive. Some doctors are monsters. And some sicknesses are far worse than death. I stepped off the bus and the air hit me like a memory I couldn't place. My hometown smelled the same, damp asphalt, faint smoke from old chimneys, but something felt wrong. The streetlights flickered, casting uneven shadows across the cracked sidewalks. I expected familiar faces, friendly nods, even a smile or two from people I'd known all my life. Instead, I felt invisible. The diner on the corner where I used to grab burgers after school had a new sign. The old neon letters were gone, replaced by something sleek, unfamiliar. I pushed the door open, expecting the creak of the familiar hinges. Nothing. The waitress glanced at me for half a second, then turned away like I wasn't even there. I froze. Walking down Main Street, I noticed more changes. Storefronts slightly altered, houses painted different colors, doors that should have led to kitchens now closed tight. But it wasn't just the physical changes. It was the people. Their eyes flicked past me with a strange, dismissive indifference, like I was a ghost walking among the living. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was tired, maybe my memory had warped. But deep down, I knew. Something about my town had shifted, and I was standing at the edge of it. I wandered further into town, trying to shake the growing unease. My first stop was my old friend Tommy's house. I remembered the blue trim on the porch, the squeaky gate that always refused to close quietly. But the house I saw now was different. Fresh paint, a new car in the driveway. I hesitated, then knocked. A man opened the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, brows furrowed. I stammered, Tommy? "It's me, Jake. We grew up together, went to high school, football games." He blinked like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "Sorry, you must have the wrong house," he said politely, closing the door before I could respond. My chest tightened. I tried to convince myself it was a simple mistake, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. Next, I went to the corner store, the place where I used to buy candy after school. The bell above the door jingled, but the clerk barely glanced up. "Hey, remember me?" "I used to hang out here all the time," I said, forcing a smile. She shook her head, then returned to arranging cans. Every aisle felt alien, every shelf slightly off, as if I had stepped into a dream that remembered my town incorrectly. Even the people on the street treated me like I wasn't there. Children darted past. Adults avoided eye contact, and friends I thought I'd recognize just passed by like strangers. Whispers seemed to follow me, faint and hurried, but when I turned, no one was there. A dog barked at me, its growl sharp and warning, before running back into a fenced yard. I found myself standing in the old park, the swings creaking in the wind. It should have brought comfort, nostalgia, but instead it felt like a stage set designed to fool me. Every step I took revealed more inconsistencies. Forgotten corners, moved benches, paths that ended abruptly. By the time the sun began to dip behind the hills, I realized I hadn't met a single person who knew me. My hometown, the place that shaped me, that I thought I understood, had become a maze, populated by strangers who didn't even see me. The dread settled deeper in my chest. Something was very, very wrong here, and I had no idea where to start unraveling it. The deeper I wandered into the town, the more surreal everything became. Familiar streets twisted in ways I didn't remember. Corners that should have led to my old hangouts now opened onto empty lots or walls. Even the landmarks I clung to, the library, the church, the gas station, had subtle differences that gnawed at my mind. The church steeple was shorter, the library's windows replaced by something modern and sterile. I rubbed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion or stress. But the feeling of wrongness only grew heavier. Shadows seemed to linger longer than they should, stretching across alleyways and abandoned buildings like they were watching me. I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, figures that vanished when I turned too quickly. The wind carried faint whispers, unintelligible but urgent, almost calling my name. My pulse quickened. Was I imagining it, or was the town alive in some way I couldn't comprehend? I tried to retrace my old walking routes. The streets I knew by heart, but nothing lined up. Every familiar path twisted unexpectedly, leading me past houses I recognized but somehow weren't mine anymore. Mailboxes bore names I didn't know, and fences that used to be white now looked rotten and blackened. Panic clawed at me. I felt like an intruder in my own life, wandering through a distorted version of a place I loved. At one point, I stumbled across the old playground behind my elementary school. The swings squeaked mournfully in the wind. The slide rusted but oddly polished, as if someone had been maintaining it just for appearances. I called out, half expecting anyone to respond. Silence. Then a shadow flickered near the edge of the lot. I froze. For a moment I thought it was a child, maybe a reflection of memory. But the figure moved with purpose, deliberate and unnatural, disappearing behind a building before I could approach. I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just that people didn't recognize me. It was that the town itself was different. It had memories I didn't share, secrets I wasn't supposed to uncover. Every street, every building, every face whispered that I was an outsider, that I had no place here. And yet I couldn't leave. Something kept pulling me forward toward a truth I wasn't ready to face, toward a horror that was waiting patiently just beyond the next corner. By the time dusk settled over the town, the feeling of being unwelcome had grown unbearable. People didn't just ignore me anymore, they actively avoided me. I tried walking down familiar streets, hoping for a friendly nod or even a curious glance, but doors slammed, heads turned sharply, and children were hurried inside before I could reach them. Even the dogs barked aggressively, as if sensing that I didn't belong. I stopped at the old diner again, desperate for some connection. The bell jingled as I pushed the door open, but the place was empty, silent except for the hum of a refrigerator. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded foreign in the empty space. I found a napkin on the counter and scrawled my name, my face, anything to remind anyone, that I existed. When I turned around, it was gone. The napkin vanished as if it had never been there. Walking further, I noticed signs posted on telephone poles, crudely written in hurried letters. "Go home. You don't belong. Leave before it's too late." My stomach knotted. This wasn't just indifference, this was warning. Someone or something wanted me gone. I questioned my own sanity. Were these messages real, or a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and confusion? I approached a figure on the sidewalk, an older woman carrying groceries. "Please, can you help me? I grew up here," I pleaded. She froze, her eyes widening. Then she dropped her bags and ran without a word. Panic surged. Every step I took, the town felt like it was tightening around me, closing its streets, hiding its residents, conspiring in silence. I ducked into the alley behind the hardware store, heart hammering, breath shallow. Shadows pooled in the corners, and faint sounds of movement echoed around me. Whispers, soft and urgent, seemed to come from the walls themselves. I felt eyes on my back, a presence I couldn't identify, following me, waiting. Something in me snapped. I knew then that the town's indifference was deliberate, that I had been erased from its memory for a reason I didn't yet understand. And if I didn't discover the truth, if I didn't uncover why no one recognized me, I would be swallowed completely by its unnatural silence, disappearing into its streets like a ghost that had wandered too far into someone else's story. I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. Something was hidden in this town, something they didn't want me to find. I retraced steps to the old mill on the outskirts, a place I hadn't visited since childhood. It had always been abandoned, but tonight it radiated a strange energy, as if it had been waiting for me. The wooden boards creaked under my weight, and the air smelled of rust and decay. But beneath it there was something else, an acrid, almost metallic scent that made my stomach churn. Inside, shadows moved oddly, stretching and bending against the walls like living things. I heard muffled whispers and then a voice, familiar yet distorted, calling my name. I spun around, but there was no one. A door at the back of the mill, previously sealed, now hung open just a crack. I hesitated, then pushed it wide. The room beyond was empty except for a single object in the center. A mirror, tall and ornate. Its surface rippling unnaturally. I approached it cautiously, drawn to its reflection. At first I saw myself, but then my image flickered. My face warped, twisted, unrecognizable. Behind me in the mirror, figures moved, their faces blurred, whispering urgently, their gestures frantic. A realization struck me with cold clarity. The town had erased me. Not physically, but from memory. I had been removed from every consciousness, every photograph, every record. They hadn't wanted me back. The horror wasn't just isolation. It was invisibility, the slow suffocation of being erased while still trapped in the world I loved. I stumbled back, heart hammering, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, and I felt the walls close in. Panic surged. I had to leave, but the town refused to let me. Exiting the mill, I found streets unfamiliar, twisted, rearranged. Every path I knew was gone, replaced by corridors that looped endlessly, mocking my attempts to escape. I sank to the ground, trembling, the reality of my situation crashing down. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake from. I was trapped in a town that didn't want me, a place that had rewritten itself to erase me. And yet somewhere in the shadows I felt eyes watching, waiting for my next move. The question burned in my mind. Could I ever reclaim what was taken, or had I become just another ghost in the streets of my own home? I finally collapsed on the cracked sidewalk, the night pressing down like a living thing. Every street I knew was gone, every familiar corner swallowed by some unseen force. I screamed, but my voice carried only emptiness bouncing back at me from the darkened windows. The town wasn't just unrecognizable, it was hostile. A living entity that had erased me from existence while letting me remain painfully aware. As I sat there, shivering, I noticed a faint light flickering from the edge of town. It wasn't a street lamp, not exactly, it pulsed, beckoning. Something inside me stirred, a stubborn ember of hope. Maybe it was a way out, maybe it was another trap. I didn't know, but I had to move. Anything was better than staying in the suffocating silence of a place that refused to see me. I rose, legs unsteady, and started walking toward that distant glow. Every step was heavy, my heart hammering in my chest, but the pull of that light was irresistible. The town whispered around me, urging me, warning me, mocking me. I couldn't tell if I was being followed or if it was just the wind carrying the voices of a place that had forsaken me. I kept walking, not knowing if I would ever leave, not knowing if anyone would ever remember me, but I moved. Because the alternative, vanishing entirely into a town that had no memory of me, was far worse. I still remember the first day she walked into our small-town classroom, the way the sunlight caught her hair just so, and how everyone went quiet when she smiled. It was a quiet town, the kind where everyone knows everyone else's business, and yet somehow she didn't seem to belong, but not in a way I could name at first. Her voice was soft, almost too soft, but it carried authority, like she owned the room without needing to claim it. I should have noticed the little things sooner, how she never mentioned where she grew up, how the other teachers avoided talking about her past, how she seemed to know details about our families that she had no reason to know. At first I chalked it up to intuition, a teacher just paying attention. But something in her gaze, a flicker when no one was looking, made my stomach tighten. By the end of that first day, I found myself watching her more than I should have, caught in a strange pull between fascination and unease. Something about her wasn't right, but the town was small, the gossip louder than the truth, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the reality hidden behind her carefully crafted smile. Over the next few weeks, I tried convincing myself I was imagining things, She seemed perfect on the surface, organized, patient, even funny in a quiet, deliberate way. But the little inconsistencies kept gnawing at me. Sometimes she would tell a story about her childhood in a town I'd never heard of, and the details didn't add up. Other times she would reference events or people that, when I asked around, nobody else remembered. My friends thought I was overthinking it, that I was just being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her presence made the air heavier, like walking into a room where the temperature had suddenly dropped. The oddest part was how she seemed to know things she shouldn't. I caught her in the hallway one afternoon, peering through the window of my locker while I wasn't looking. When I confronted her, she simply smiled and said, "Just making sure everyone's safe." Her voice was calm, reassuring, but there was a sharpness beneath it that made my chest tighten. Then came the rumors. Little whispers from classmates, things she supposedly said outside of school, hints about places she'd been, stories about people who had vanished from towns she claimed to have lived in. At first I dismissed them. Gossip travels fast in small towns, and exaggeration is the rule, not the exception. But the pieces kept piling up, each one more unsettling than the last. One evening, as I walked home past the deserted park behind the school, I saw her standing under a street lamp alone, talking to someone or something I couldn't see. Her head tilted in that unnatural way, the same way she had looked at me in class studying me. My pulse quickened and I realized that curiosity wasn't enough anymore. I needed answers. I needed to know who she really was before it was too late. After that night in the park, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time I walked past the school, I half expected to see her lurking, waiting, watching. My friends started noticing my distraction, but when I tried to explain, it sounded ridiculous even to me. "She's just your teacher," they said. "Stop overthinking it." But it wasn't just overthinking. Something about the way she moved, the way she watched people, suggested she was always calculating, always aware of things no one else could see. Then the strange incidents began. Notes left on my desk written in a neat hand I didn't recognize, with messages like, "Be careful who you trust," and "Some truths are better left hidden." At first, I assumed they were pranks, maybe from one of the older kids. But the handwriting wasn't familiar, and the notes always stopped just short of giving me answers, like she wanted me aware but not fully informed. One late afternoon, I stayed after class to ask her about a history assignment, but she wasn't in the classroom. Her bag was gone, her desk neatly organized as if she had never been there. That's when I noticed the faint smell of something metallic, sharp, lingering in the air, like blood mixed with iron. My stomach turned. I started watching her more closely, tracking her movements without her knowing. She would slip into rooms I knew were off limits, disappear down alleys behind the school, and occasionally, I caught glimpses of her in the shadows near abandoned houses. Every time I tried to follow her, she seemed to vanish like smoke, leaving nothing but that unnerving, calculated silence. By the end of the week, fear was settling in alongside my curiosity. I didn't just want to know who she was anymore, I needed to. Each day, each small observation, each whispered rumor made it harder to ignore that the woman we called our teacher was not who she claimed to be. And the more I learned, the closer I felt to something I wasn't ready to face, something that could change my understanding of the town, of her, and maybe even of me. I finally found the proof I hadn't dared hope for one rainy evening. The town library was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, and I was rifling through old newspaper clippings for a school project when I stumbled upon an article that made my hand shake. The photograph wasn't clear, but the face was unmistakable. My teacher, but years younger, listed in connection with a series of incidents in another state. Disappearances, fraud, false identities. My mind reeled. This wasn't a coincidence. I left the library in a daze, clutching the fragile pages like evidence of a nightmare I wasn't sure I wanted to confront. Every step back to my house felt heavier, as if the town itself was pressing down, warning me to stop. But curiosity, once a small itch, had turned into a gnawing obsession. I had to know the truth. The next day I tried to act normal, but I could barely focus. I watched her in class, noticing every small gesture, every smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something in her expression flickered when she caught me staring. A subtle tightening around her mouth. A blink that was too fast to be natural. She knew I was onto her. By afternoon I followed her again, keeping a careful distance. She slipped into the old mill at the edge of town, a place no one dared enter after sundown. The windows were boarded up, shadows pooling like ink. I crouched behind a rusted fence, heart hammering, listening to the faint scrape of her movements inside. My imagination raced with every horror I'd read or heard about small towns and secrets buried too long. Inside, I could make out her silhouette through the gaps, moving with deliberate precision. And then she turned suddenly, as if sensing me, her shadow pausing, unmoving for a moment that stretched too long. I ducked instinctively, unable to breathe, praying she hadn't seen me. That night I lay awake, the rain drumming against my window, the image of her turning haunting me. I knew the pieces were falling into place, and I was closer than ever to the truth. But the closer I got, the more dangerous it felt, as if unraveling her carefully constructed life might pull me into something I wasn't ready to survive. And still I couldn't stop. The next day I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her, or at least find more concrete proof before anyone else could intervene. After school I trailed her again, careful to stay in the shadows, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. She moved with that same deliberate grace, but there was an edge now, a sense that she knew I was coming. She led me to the outskirts of town, to the old abandoned farmhouse everyone said was cursed. Windows shattered, the paint peeling, boards hanging loosely from the walls. The air smelled of mildew and rot, and my stomach churned as I stepped closer. Inside, faint candlelight flickered, casting elongated, twitching shadows across the room. I crouched behind a doorway, straining to see. And then I saw her, sitting at a table covered in old photographs, documents, and small trinkets that didn't belong to anyone in town. Her head tilted, studying each item with meticulous care, as though cataloging evidence of lives she had quietly erased or stolen. I froze, unable to breathe, realizing the depth of her deception. She wasn't just lying about who she was. She had been living under false identities for years, moving from town to town, leaving confusion and fear in her wake. Suddenly she spoke without turning. "I wondered when you'd find me," she said, calm and measured, but there was something predatory in her tone. My pulse spiked and I backed away, tripping over a loose board. The sound echoed sharp and loud. Her head snapped in my direction, eyes narrowing. I bolted, heart hammering, dodging debris as I ran through the farmhouse and out into the rainy night. I didn't look back, but I could feel her presence behind me, relentless and calculating. By the time I reached the safety of the streetlights near my home, drenched and gasping, I realized how close I had come to something I couldn't fully understand or survive. The truth was there, terrifying and complete, but confronting it had only brought me face to face with the danger she represented. And deep down I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a storm waiting to strike, and our small town might never be safe again. The next morning, the school felt different, colder somehow, as if her absence or perhaps her presence was still lingering in the hallways. I kept glancing at empty classrooms, half expecting her to appear, that calm, calculated smile twisting into something I couldn't unsee. The town carried on, oblivious, unaware of how close I had come to discovering the full extent of her deception. I tried telling myself it was over, that I had seen enough to protect myself, maybe even warn others, but the memory of her in that farmhouse stayed with me. The documents, the photographs, the intensity in her eyes when she knew I was watching. I realized that some people aren't who they appear to be, and some truths aren't meant to be confronted head-on. Weeks passed. She never returned to school, and official records gave no hint of her past. The town whispered theories, but nothing concrete surfaced. And yet, every time I pass the old mill or see a stranger in the rain, a shiver runs down my spine. Because somewhere out there she's still moving, still hiding. And I know that one day our paths might cross again. And when they do, I'll be ready. Or at least I hope I will be. I should have turned back the moment I crossed the town line. From the highway it looked like every other sleepy town. Red brick storefronts, a single diner with a flickering neon sign, and trees lining streets that curved like they were hiding secrets. But something about the air felt wrong, thick, almost sticky, like it held its own weight. I parked my car in front of the diner, the engine ticking down, and tried to shake the uneasy feeling pressing against my chest. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, and every head turned. Smiles greeted me, but they didn't reach their eyes. "New in town?" a waitress asked, her voice cheerful but too clipped, too rehearsed. I nodded, and she slid a menu across the counter like she'd been waiting for me. The patrons chatted quietly, their laughter a fraction too delayed, too hollow. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just small-town quietness, magnified by my nerves. Yet when I glanced out the window, I noticed no one walked the streets. The diner's reflection swallowed the sidewalks whole. I sipped my coffee, hoping the warmth would calm me. But deep down, a voice whispered I wasn't here by accident, and leaving might not be so simple. I decided to explore the town before the sun fully set, telling myself a little walk would shake the tension building in my chest. The streets were narrow, almost claustrophobic, and the houses pressed close together like they were conspiring to keep me inside. I waved at a man mowing his lawn, but he didn't wave back. He just stopped mid-push and stared until I turned away. The locals I did encounter all shared the same unsettling traits. Smiles too wide, greetings too bright, voices that carried just a hint of something rehearsed. "Enjoying your stay?" a woman asked as I passed her on the sidewalk, clutching her shopping bag like it was a shield. I nodded cautiously, and she gave a small, knowing smile, one that made my stomach tighten. I tried to blend in, taking in the details that made the town feel alive yet wrong. Storefronts displayed old-fashioned signs. Flower boxes overflowed with perfect blooms, and the air smelled faintly of fresh bread. But underneath it all was a strange metallic tang that made my throat dry. A rusted sign near the park read, "Welcome visitors," but the letters were chipped and worn, as if the town had been greeting strangers for decades, and perhaps warning them at the same time. By mid-afternoon, I started noticing the rules, small but sharp. A no trespassing sign on a path that led to a creek, an old man muttering about the dangers of wandering after dark, and even a local kid staring at me with such intensity it felt accusatory. Rumors flitted through whispered conversations as I passed open windows, stories of people who came and never left, of nights when the town seemed to shift and change, almost alive. Every step I took made me aware of the way the town's gaze followed me. Even the birds seemed too still, perched as if judging my presence. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself nerves and imagination were at play. But as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching along the brick streets, I realized I wasn't just an outsider here. I was something the town noticed, and perhaps something it didn't plan to let go. By the next morning, my unease had turned into a gnawing sense of being watched. I tried leaving town the way I came, heading toward the highway, but every turn seemed to loop me back to the main street. The same diner, the same empty sidewalks. Even my GPS acted as though it refused to cooperate, redrawing routes that led me nowhere. Panic prickled under my skin, but I forced myself to keep moving. The locals' behavior grew stranger as the day went on. I stopped at a gas station asking for directions out, and the attendant's smile faltered for the first time. "You'll want to stay the night," he said softly, almost pleading, his eyes darting to the door like he feared someone, or something, outside. I laughed nervously, shaking my head, but even as I drove on, I noticed a shadow at every corner, a figure in the distance that vanished whenever I tried to focus. Rumors I had overheard the day before began to make sense. An old woman at the park whispered about missing travelers, her voice shaking as she warned, "You can't leave once they know you're here." I tried to convince myself she was crazy, but the stories made a sick kind of sense. Each street I took, every shortcut I attempted, ended in dead ends or loops back into the town's core. As the sun dipped behind the hills, a cold dread settled in my chest. I realized the town had been setting boundaries from the start, small, subtle, and almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Fences, locked gates, and even the natural layout of the streets worked together to trap outsiders. The people didn't need to stop me. The town itself seemed to do the work. I parked on a quiet side street, trying to calm my racing thoughts, and that's when I noticed the silhouettes watching me from the distance. Not just one or two, but clusters of figures, still and silent, stationed along rooftops, near doorways, and behind hedges. Their presence wasn't threatening in an immediate sense, it was deeper, a suffocating awareness that I had stepped into a place where leaving was no longer a simple choice. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside my window made me flinch. I kept replaying the old woman's warning in my head. You can't leave once they know you're here. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized the town had been guiding me from the moment I arrived, herding me like cattle without me even noticing. The next day I started investigating. I asked questions at the diner, at the small library tucked between two shops, and even at the gas station I had visited before. But the answers were always vague, cryptic, or strangely rehearsed. One librarian, when I asked about visitors who had left, hesitated, then whispered, "They don't." Her eyes darted around the room as if someone might overhear. My stomach turned cold. I walked past houses with windows cracked open just enough to reveal shadows moving inside, though no one stepped outside. I found discarded belongings along the roadside, shoes, backpacks, an old camera, things that made it clear people had tried to leave and failed. A journal lay half buried in the grass. Inside, scribbled notes spoke of late-night pursuits, strange figures appearing at windows, and the terror of being trapped in a town that didn't forgive escape attempts. By dusk, I felt them watching me again. Not just the occasional glimpse of a shadow, but a deliberate, almost ritualistic attention. Figures followed at a distance, ducking behind walls and alleyways when I turned my head. The sense of being hunted was subtle at first, then undeniable, and I realized that fear itself was part of their method. Wear you down, make you doubt, make you compliant. I tried to map a route out, memorizing streets and landmarks, but every path twisted back toward the center. Panic surged in waves, cold and inescapable. The town wasn't just alive, it was intelligent, anticipating my moves, feeding on my terror. I had to find another way. Some loophole or hidden escape, or I would be trapped here indefinitely. Just another story the town swallowed whole. I knew I had to act before night fell completely. The sun was dipping below the hills, casting long shadows across streets that now seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet every route I tried ended at the same old diner or the same quiet park. I started to feel the town's pulse beneath my feet, guiding me, corralling me, making sure I stayed where I didn't belong. I parked my car at the edge of a side street and began walking, trying to blend in, hoping the locals wouldn't notice me as an outsider attempting to flee. But the shadows were everywhere now, lingering in alleyways, crouching behind fences, slipping from rooftop to rooftop. Occasionally, a figure would step into the street just long enough to block my path, then vanish like mist when I blinked. My heart pounded. The town wasn't letting me leave, and whatever force controlled it wasn't subtle anymore. I stumbled upon an old warehouse at the far edge of town, its windows dark and broken. Something inside called to me, a twisted hope that maybe this was the escape route no one had taken. As I approached, I heard faint chanting, low and rhythmic, echoing off the walls. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the scent of smoke and something metallic. My gut told me to run, but curiosity and desperation pushed me forward. Inside, the room was filled with townsfolk standing in a circle, faces shadowed, eyes fixed on the center where old photographs of outsiders were pinned to the wall, people who had tried to leave and never returned. A chill ran down my spine. I realized I was just another name waiting to be added, another outsider the town wanted to claim. Panic surged. I bolted, shoving past the nearest figure. They moved with uncanny precision, always one step behind, herding me back toward the streets I'd tried to escape. The night swallowed me as I ran, the town pressing in from every side. Each turn, each alley seemed to stretch endlessly, like a trap that reshaped itself around my fear. I thought I might make it, but a distant bell rang, the same sound from the diner's door, and I froze. The town wasn't just watching. It was alive, aware, and it wasn't finished with me yet. I never found the highway. No matter how far I ran, no matter which streets I turned down, I always ended up back in the heart of the town. Exhaustion clawed at me, and the cold sweat on my back felt like the town itself was pressing me down. The silhouettes I had glimpsed earlier weren't just shadows. They were waiting, patient and silent, watching my every move. By dawn, I realized the truth. This town didn't just want me to stay. It needed me to stay. It had swallowed outsiders before me and would swallow me too if I let it. Every door I tried was locked, every alley a maze, every familiar landmark a cruel trick of perspective. It was as if the town itself had consciousness, a malevolent awareness that whispered in the wind and moved in the corners of my vision. I sit now in what I've learned is the only place the town allows me. Its diner, staring out at streets that will never lead me home. Some part of me hopes someone will come looking, but deep down, I know they'll never escape either. The town doesn't let outsiders leave. And if I close my eyes too long, I can almost hear it breathing, counting the moments until it claims me completely. I arrived in my hometown just as the sun was sinking behind the jagged hills, casting long shadows that made the streets look narrower than I remembered. Everyone said this was just another quiet small town, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. But tonight felt different. The air was thick, like it carried a secret it didn't want me to hear. People moved slowly, whispering to each other with strange, knowing smiles. And when I asked about the evening, they simply nodded and said, "You'll see." I had heard rumors everyone here celebrates a night where the town pretends to be dead, but I thought it was just a story parents told their kids to scare them into bed. Now, standing in the center of the square, I realized it wasn't a story. Windows went dark one by one, doors clicked shut, and even the stray dog that usually padded along the sidewalks vanished without a trace. The silence hit me first, a weight heavier than anything I'd felt in years. And then I noticed the eyes, peeking from behind curtains, from shadows at the edge of the street, eyes that followed me with too much intent. I had stepped into a town that was alive, yet somehow entirely dead. I had always thought small towns were harmless, the kind of places where everyone knew everyone, and the worst that could happen was a rumor spreading faster than wildfire. But tonight I realized how wrong I was. Driving in, the town had looked picturesque. White picket fences, neatly trimmed lawns, streetlights casting a golden glow over empty sidewalks. It felt like a postcard. But now, as I walked toward the main street, every detail seemed off, too quiet, too rehearsed, as if the town itself was holding its breath. I passed a group of older men near the corner store, their eyes glinting in the dim light. They tipped their hats at me but didn't speak. Across the street, a little girl clutched her mother's hand, staring at me with a solemn expression that made my stomach knot. When I asked someone why everyone acted so strange, they whispered, "Don't break the rules." Not tonight, that was all. The tension built with every step. House after house, lights went out as if a switch had been flipped. Mailboxes sagged in silence, and the wind seemed to carry muffled footsteps that weren't mine. It wasn't just that the town was quiet. It was that it felt alive in some unnatural way, like the shadows themselves were aware of me. I tried to make sense of it, telling myself it was tradition, a harmless game where everyone played dead. Yet nothing about this felt playful. The air had a tang of fear, and I noticed subtle movements. Curtains twitching, shutters rattling. Someone or something was watching. My heart hammered, and I debated turning back, but the pull of curiosity was too strong. I needed to see this through, to understand why an entire town would sink into silence at the same hour each year, pretending to be dead. As I rounded the corner toward the old square, I caught a glimpse of the town's mayor standing stiffly in the shadows, his face half hidden by the lamplight. His eyes met mine, sharp and unyielding. "You're late," he said quietly. And I realized that tonight, in this town, even being a visitor carried consequences I couldn't yet imagine. Night fell completely, and the town seemed to vanish into itself. Streetlights flickered, then died one by one, leaving only the faint glow of the moon to illuminate the cracked sidewalks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of a swinging sign or the distant whisper of the wind. Every step I took felt louder than it should, echoing through empty streets as if the town itself was listening. I watched the ritual begin. Houses went dark in unison, doors locked with careful precision, and shadows pooled into corners where movement was forbidden. People lay flat in their yards, on porches, in hallways, motionless and lifeless, their faces turned toward the ground. It was unsettling, a performance of death so precise it made my skin crawl. I thought I understood the tradition, but as I observed, something didn't add up. Some of the dead twitched, a finger flexed, a head shifted ever so slightly. My pulse spiked and a cold dread trickled down my spine. Curiosity pushed me closer. I crouched behind a parked car and tried to take it all in. There was a rhythm to the town's stillness, a haunting choreography that everyone seemed to follow without speaking. Yet those subtle movements, the twitching, the faint breathing in places that should have been frozen, hinted at something darker lurking beneath the surface. The rules of this night were not what they appeared to be. I wandered down an alley, hoping to find someone to talk to reassure myself that this was harmless. But the alley was empty. The buildings leaned in as if whispering warnings. Then I saw it. A shadow slipping along a wall that couldn't belong to anyone dead. It moved too fluidly, too deliberately. My stomach knotted and I froze. Whatever this was, it wasn't part of the ritual. The sense of isolation hit me fully then. In a town where everyone was pretending to be dead, I was painfully alive, exposed. My heart thundered in my ears as I realized the truth. The ritual was never meant for spectators. And if I wasn't careful, I wouldn't just be watching this night unfold. I'd be caught in it. Panic set in as I realized leaving the town wasn't as simple as retracing my steps. Every street I turned down seemed unfamiliar, though I had just walked them. Shadows stretched impossibly long, corners shifted, and the silence pressed against me like a living thing. I tried to call someone, anyone, but my phone displayed nothing. No signal, not a single bar. It felt as though the town had swallowed me whole, trapping me inside its ritual. I ducked into a narrow side street, heart hammering, hoping to find a friendly face. That's when I noticed movement that shouldn't have been there. A man lay dead on a porch, but his eyes were open, glinting faintly in the darkness. He didn't move toward me, yet the awareness in his gaze was terrifying. I realized with a cold stab of fear that some of the townspeople weren't playing. They were watching, waiting. I stumbled forward, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Perhaps they were testing me, seeing how an outsider reacted. But the air around me grew thicker, heavier, as if the town itself was aware of my fear. Each step felt like stepping deeper into quicksand, pulling me toward something inevitable. Then the whispering began. Low, murmured voices from nowhere and everywhere at once. I spun around, but the streets remained empty. Still the sound persisted, layered with faint laughter and the creak of unseen doors. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more I felt like prey in a cage I couldn't see. I ran, heart slamming in my chest, desperate to find an exit. The buildings seemed to close in, alleys twisting unnaturally, forcing me back toward the square. And there at the center stood the mayor again. His expression was calm, unnervingly patient. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "But now that you are—" He didn't finish the sentence, and I understood instantly that escape wasn't just difficult. It was forbidden. Frozen in place, I felt the weight of the town press down, the ritual no longer a spectacle but a trap. Every dead figure around me seemed to breathe in unison with the shadows, drawing me deeper into the town's secret. The realization hit me like ice. Tonight I wasn't merely witnessing the ritual. Tonight I was part of it. I forced myself to keep moving, though each step felt heavier than the last. The square, which had seemed empty before, now throbbed with a presence I couldn't name. The dead townspeople weren't lying down anymore. They were rising slowly, deliberately, their movements unnervingly synchronized. Their eyes were hollow but focused, as if measuring how much of me they could consume before I realized the danger. I tried to speak, to demand answers, but my voice cracked and caught in my throat. Everything I thought I understood about this tradition was wrong. It wasn't a harmless ritual. It was a test. A warning. A trap designed to absorb anyone foolish enough to witness it uninvited. The history of the town, whispered to me by the few brave enough to meet my gaze, came together in a terrifying clarity. This night had always been about survival, about proving your place, or losing it entirely. I ducked behind a fallen signpost and peered through the shadows. A group of townspeople moved toward a house at the edge of the square, guiding someone who struggled, gasping into the darkness. I recognized the movements from the earlier twitching, the subtle signs of life beneath the stillness. They weren't pretending anymore. They were hunting, and the prey wasn't always new visitors. Panic pushed me into an alley that opened onto the outskirts of the town, near the overgrown cemetery. Here I stumbled upon the mayor again, standing beside an ancient oak whose roots twisted like veins across the ground. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and inevitability. "It's the night everyone fears and envies," he said. "The night where the living learn what it means to be seen and unseen." I realized then that the ritual was as much about becoming invisible as it was about pretending to be dead. The townspeople's calm, their unblinking eyes were survival, and I, alive, noisy, terrified, was in the wrong role entirely. The moon dipped behind a cloud, plunging the town into near darkness. I understood that I had little time to adapt, to join or escape, and that the line between spectator and participant had already blurred. The town was no longer a backdrop. It was a living entity, and I was trapped inside its heartbeat. My choices had narrowed to one terrifying possibility: obey or be consumed. The night dragged on, heavy and unyielding, each moment stretching like a shadow across my mind. I followed the town's rhythm, unsure whether I was blending in or simply delaying the inevitable. Every twitch of a curtain, every flicker of light reminded me that eyes were on me, calculating, judging. I wasn't just a visitor anymore. I was part of their secret, woven into the ritual whether I wanted it or not. By dawn, the streets slowly stirred back to life. Windows lit up, doors creaked open, and the townspeople returned to their everyday facades, smiling and nodding as if nothing had happened. I walked among them, breathing the same air, feeling the same warmth, yet everything felt wrong. I had survived the night, but survival had changed me. Every glance, every shadow seemed charged with a new meaning, a reminder that the town's heartbeat still pulsed, waiting for the next night, the next outsider, the next mistake. As I finally reached the edge of town, I realized something chilling. I could leave physically, but a part of me would always remain here. The memory of the streets, the eyes, the ritual, they would never let me go completely. The town thrived on fear, secrecy, and participation, and now I carried its weight. The night everyone pretends to be dead had ended, but the terror lingered, and I knew deep down it wasn't over. The secret buried in that erased town was never supernatural, it was human. Survivors confessed that the silence was enforced not by myth but by fear. Fear of what their neighbors would do if the truth ever surfaced. That's why the files were destroyed and why generations pretended nothing ever happened. In the end, the cover-up became more terrifying than the original horror itself. These true small-town horror stories remind us that the most disturbing nightmares don't come from monsters in the dark, but from ordinary places where trust turns to terror. Small towns promise safety, but sometimes the very ground they stand on is soaked in secrets too heavy to ever leave. But ask yourself, if your own hometown carried a secret this dark, would you notice it before it was too late? Make sure to subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for more true horror stories that were never meant to be heard. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if this happened to you?